Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. If you do like the programming you see here and the musicians and artists I visit with, please be sure and hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Paul Hoffert is a Canadian recording artist, composer, author, teacher, and corporate executive. In 1969, Paul co-founded jazz rock band Lighthouse. The band has sold millions of records and won 3 Juno Awards during their life together. Lighthouse originally played until 1976, calling it a day, but it wasn't to be permanent as the core members reformed in 1992 and have been performing ever since. In addition to Lighthouse, Paul is an award-winning composer and has enjoyed great success with his scores for many films and TV productions. He has also authored several books. In the areas of science and technology, Mr. Hoffert has helped pioneer the development of digital audio and instrumentation. In 2005, Paul received Canada's highest honor, the Order of Canada. And my guest continues to perform with Lighthouse and his jazz ensembles. Well, welcome, Paul. Thank you for being here and taking time out to visit.
Good to see you. The only thing I would add to your excellent little short intro is that I'm actually born in Brooklyn,
Yes.
and I am currently a dual citizen of Canada and the United States, and my wife and I have a home in Florida as well as Toronto, Canada. So we're kind of bi something, binational, whatever it is.
by North American, something like
Yeah,
that. Okay,
gotta be careful.
whatever. Okay, thank you for that. Well, so you were born in New York. How many years did you spend there before relocating to Canada?
Not many. When I was 13 years old, my family moved to Canada,
Okay.
and I was just part of the baggage. Was not consulted in the move. So
They didn't ask you.
I went up to Toronto, which was
Yeah. Well, going back while you were in New York, I want to ask you, was there music in the household early on?
yes, we had a household with a lot of music. Primarily, my father's family were all singers, like operatic kind of singers.
Okay.
So he had 5 other brothers, and every time there would be a family get together or a wedding or some other kind of holiday or something like that, everybody get together, and there'd be a kind of shredding contest between amongst the uncles and my dad, who would sing. Some were beautiful and soft, and some were like my dad were bombastic and loud. Anyway, I think the reason that my parents finally agreed, apparently when I was a youngster, I was bothering them to get me a piano and give me piano lessons. I have no recollection of it, but the turning point, the tripping point, or the tipping point seemed to be that my dad had a conversation with some of his brothers, and they said, well, every time there's a family gathering, they need somebody to accompany them on the piano whilst they're doing their sort of show off vocalizing. And so the hope was that either myself or my older brother Marty would have some aptitude in that regard. And they got us a piano on the basis that we would both take lessons. And we both agreed. My brother dropped out after about a month, and I ended up accompanying them. And since they had no formal music training, they didn't have any sheet music or anything like that. So I would be always thrown into these situations when I was, say, 8, 9, or 10 years old, where they would get up and just start singing in some arbitrary key, some arbitrary song they had never heard of, in some arbitrary language I didn't understand. And I would have to figure it out. So it gave me actually a positive background in playing by ear and being able to sort of guess what harmonies go with what. And
Yeah. maneuver your way around the piano at that early age, like that.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
But I would say culturally, as a youngster, when I went to junior high school, I went to Cethlo Junior High School in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn. And my friends and I were really enamored of the kind of early rock and roll in those days. So my idol as a keyboard player was Fats Domino.
Okay. Okay.
And we loved all the doo-wop bands. So that's something that doesn't ring
Right. Well, a lot of those, like in New York and I guess Jersey too, the street corner crooners and that kind of thing. Yes.
absolutely the Five Satins and bands like that.
Yeah.
And so some of my older friends, so when I was maybe probably 12 years old, I joined my first band.
Oh,
It was
okay.
called the Bop Tones.
Okay.
And it was Nicky Bop and Stevie Bop and Johnny Bop, and I was Polly Bop.
I like that.
And
Well,
and that was a handle that years later, when the internet came around, and I needed an email address. I adopted that, and I still it's my internet email.
it is.
And people said, "Where did you get that from, Polly
Yeah,
Bop?"
that's where that came from. Well, how long were you guys together?
Well, we were together until my family moved when I was 13. So I was in the band for about a year, and in that year, we played at a bunch of, I guess, local dances and things like that. And a producer from Manhattan, whose name I don't remember, uh, saw us at one of the dances and decided to record a couple of singles with us. So the Bop Tones had two singles, and one was "I Want to Love You," the other was "Betty Jean," and against all odds, and I had no, as a kid, I had no idea about the business or the business of music. I know that they were in the local jukeboxes in Brooklyn, and I felt very excited and happy when I could hear the music that we had recorded uh, at this Manhattan studio, and impress my friends that
Yeah,
I was not just telling them I was a musician, but I could prove it, because you could go into a coffee shop
right.
and
It's on the jukebox there. Yeah,
hear our songs. So I was pretty well
yeah,
hooked in
yeah.
those days.
Well, you did any of those guys from that band go on to any other musical adventures? Do you know?
Yes, I do. The only one that I followed for a while was our lead singer, Nick Lamparello, of course, Nicky Bop, and he was in the original cast production of West Side Story on
Oh,
Broadway.
was he? Okay, okay.
So I don't know what happened to him after that. He was a great singer. He was for those of your listeners that might have remembered the old TV sitcoms with what's his name, the Fonz. Remember the Fonz from that show? He was sort of the equivalent within our band of the
Uh-huh.
Fonz. He wore the leather jackets, and he had the attitude
Oh
of
yeah.
of a
Happy
Fonz.
day. Happy days. Yeah.
Happy days, yeah, and he was sort of my protection in junior high school, because there was still some gangs around in those days, and but if you knew the Fonz, if you knew Nicky Bop,
Yeah.
then
You're
people would leave you alone.
yeah, right, right. It's good to have somebody like that to kind of protect you. Well, can you remember one of the first live shows that you attended? Live concerts?
That I attended,
Hmm.
yes. Uh, uh, my memory is very dim. I mean, from my early years especially, but I mean, occasionally the spaghetti connects in my brain, but uh, I do remember going to, I think it was in downtown Brooklyn, maybe at a place called the Fox Theater, where the DJ at the time, his name will come to me, used to have these big rock and roll shows with, with all the bands that get together, and we'd all take the elevated subway,
Yeah.
and go and hear all of the artists that were. I mean, at the time we didn't realize it was just promotion for selling records, but it was very exciting. And yeah, so the piano lessons I took were classical. So I studied classical music, classical piano for about 3 or 4 years. And my piano teacher had hopes that I would be interested in pursuing a career as a concert pianist. So she arranged for an audition at Curtis School of Music. Most musicians will know what Curtis School of Music in Philadelphia is. It's probably the #1 classical sort of breeding ground for international classical solo artists. And she came with me. We took a train to Philadelphia, where I wasn't very aware of the whole business of auditions and that kind of thing, but I knew that at my public school and junior high school, they would have these auditoriums, and my fellow classmates and I would get up and do whatever it is that we were doing at the time. Maybe doing some dancing or singing, or in my case, playing piano, and I would play classical compositions. But unlike my colleagues who were studying classical musician, my brother, who had stopped taking piano lessons, was very much into music. But since he's 5 years older than I am, still to this day, amazingly,
Isn't that wild?
he was his musical tastes were he was a budding jazz enthusiast, and we had this little plastic jukebox in our house that could play LPs and 45s. And so instead of practicing my classical lessons, he would sit with me every day and play me his jazz records. At the time, I guess it was Dave Brubeck and Oscar Peterson and all the pianists, the jazz piano players of the time. So everything from bebop to Dixieland. And so at that young age, having honed some of my ear for music with my uncles trying to accompany them, he would sit with me for 2 or 3 hours every day, and until I would try to emulate playing all of those jazz piano things. And so when I would go to the auditoriums at my school and play my little my classical pieces of music I was studying, I would segue into jazz improvisations based on those things, the way I had been listening to them at home. And the jazz musicians played the head, the sort of melody once, and then you improvise on it. And it went over huge at my public school, and then later at my junior high school. And both my fellow students and and their parents who came to some of these things always applauded, and I liked that. So when I went for my audition at Curtis School of Music, I believe I was playing Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. Just before I went on, I was listening to some of my competition, some of these other young kids who were like really talented, and they were really good. And I realized that some of them were even better than I was, which in my public school and junior high school, I was kind of like, one of the most talented kids. And I said, wow. But I realized that none of them were improvising. So I said, I know, I can do that. Nobody else can do that. And if anything will get me a scholarship, that's what it will. So I started playing Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, And 2 or 3 minutes into it, I sort of seamlessly, to my understanding at that time, segued into some jazz improvisations of based on Beethoven's themes and keys. Anyway, after 5 or 6 minutes of that, I finished the other 20 minutes of the sonata, and I just felt I really nailed it. It was the best I think that I ever played, the best I ever improvised. I had a great time. And then when it came time for the adjudication, I was a little surprised when the head juror stood up and said, Mr. Hoffert, if Mr. Beethoven was alive today, I don't think he would have appreciated the way you totally demolished his music and had
no.
respect at all for his great genius and so and so. And there's no place for you at Curtis School of Music.
Oh, wow.
So having failed that test and feeling good about what I did,
Yeah.
I basically decided at that moment that classical music was probably not a direction.
Yeah.
That I wasn't for them. And at the time I thought they probably weren't for me. With time, my classical background has been an asset for me and various other things that I did. So anyway, that's when I came back from that, and my piano teacher, who was very disappointed, and she said, "How you feeling?" and everything. I said, "I feel good. I think I did good." When I came back, I decided that my love for early rock and roll in those days was much more to my liking, and that's when I asked around and found out about the band called the Bobtowns and asked the guys if I could join, and that led the way to my path first as a jazz musician, and then in my 20s when I started Lighthouse, I came back to rock and roll, which by then wasn't too much like Fats Domino and the Five Satins. It was more like psychedelia and taking LSD and doing all sorts of other mind-altering things that seemed like fun at the time.
Right, right. Well, you released a jazz album at the age of 16.
Indeed, I did. Indeed, I did, and that was
That's
that was
early.
one of many, many fortunate, very lucky breaks that I've had in my career. At the time, when I was 15, a year before that, a friend of mine who was a fellow performer at my high school in Toronto, and he used to do Broadway, songs from Broadway musical stuff. And because I could read music and also had an ear for music, so I could transpose, I would accompany all the all the students when they were doing their little the musicals and stuff. So he decided to audition for our national broadcaster, the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which back then was trying to promote Canadian talent, and they decided to do a sweep across Canada and find young Canadian talent, and then give us our own variety television show for the summer replacement to something or other called While We're Young.
Yeah.
And so my friend, who's a singer, said, would I go to this audition with him and accompany him? And I said, sure. And I did. And he was fortunate. He made the audition, but just like in an old Judy Garland kind of movie in Hollywood, the music director of the show came up to me and said, "Hey kid, you play piano pretty good, this and that." Started speaking with me, and I played some jazz stuff for him. Anyway, I ended up getting picked up in the sweep, and was one of the talented youngsters that were given this summer variety show. that was network and had a big budget and everything like that, had writers and I loved it. And I loved being on television and I loved the whole technology.
Yeah.
The whole idea of, at the time, I didn't know any of the fancy words of mediated performance through technology. I sensed, because when I was a little kid now, before music lessons or anything, I used to watch very early 1950s television, Howdy Doody show and kids television programs. And in the New York area, I don't know if it was national, there was a show called Mr. Imagination for kids. And my friends and I used to watch it every day. And it was a children's show that tried to take historical elements and sort of do little plays around it. Anyway, it was a show. I don't remember much about it. But my public school had arranged for several of our classes to travel to Manhattan, where in Grand Central Station, there was one of the early television studios that was doing live television before they had videotape or anything. So all television was live. And this Mr. Imagination show was coming from there, and we were the audience. And I remember an aha moment when I realized that when I was home watching this show, this television show, Mr. Imagination and the other actors would be what I thought was looking at me and speaking to me and performing to me. And when I went down and was in the audience, I realized that there were these television cameras and they were just looking at the television cameras and that there was this whole facade of sort of the Wizard of Oz and like,
oh, yes,
pull
yes.
back the curtain
Pull back the curtain. Yes, yes.
and do that.
Yeah.
So when I finally got to be on television as a teenager, it sort of closed the circle and I loved it and I really liked it. So I continued doing, at that time I had a jazz quartet. I was playing vibraphone, like vibes, like modern jazz quartet sort of thing. And by the next winter, the producer and music director of the summer show had a regular, for adults show. And they started using me for various things. And the music director owned the record company. And he said, why don't you do this record? And so because of that connection, because of that accidental sort of pinball bouncing around the entertainment world and hitting bumpers and ending up somewhere or other, that I had a jazz record released when I was 16 years old, I think you said. So that sounds about right.
Yes.
And it actually got played on jazz stations. And that helped my burgeoning career as on television. And I had many, many lucky experiences. So one of them was that I guess when I moved to Canada, I stopped taking piano lessons and I started studying vibraphone, which is not something that a lot of kids did, but I used to hang out with my older brother and some adults who were into jazz at the after hours jazz clubs in Toronto. So they were after hours, which meant that the players after their regular gigs, playing in bars and stuff, would come and play there. But because it was after hours and we had strict liquor laws, they were coffee houses that didn't have any alcohol. So I could go there, so I could be let in. And I would sit in with the jazz musicians and stuff. And after I had a jazz album in which I used many of the really great jazz musicians who were in Toronto, and I got to know them. I started playing around town and had a great career. But the problem I had was that my teacher as a vibraphone player, Haggard Hardy, who had a couple of big hits as a vibraphone, is a wonderful man, great benefactor to me. He and this other guy, Peter Appleyard, were the only two mallet players, vibraphone,
Oh, okay.
marimba, that could read music at the time in Toronto, because most of the other vibraphonists were sort of jazz players and stuff. So they did all of what we called studio work. So recordings, radio, television, anything that required just hiring musicians who could read music and who could play in popular styles. So he started using me as a sub. And this was incredible because every musician I had met in my young career at the time wanted to get studio work because it paid extremely well. And there were residuals you got for commercials and all sorts of stuff. But it was almost impossible to get into the little clique of the top players who sort of hoarded their studio work. And the problem that the top players had, including my teacher, was that there was more work than the number of top musicians who were in the insider group.
Yeah.
And so they had to get a sub from time to time. They were double booked or triple booked. And in the case of in those days, a lot of recordings were using vibraphone. And there were only these two guys who were doing all the work in Toronto, which was a big city and had a lot of recording work. So they started using me as their sub. I was 15, then 16 years old. And this was incredible. But unlike the other jobbing musicians at the time, who were in there, most of them were in their late teens and 20s and 30s. I didn't have a phone. There were no cell phones, of course, at the time. And I was going to high school. So they couldn't call me for gigs. So I would be sitting in my high school, Bathurst Heights Collegiate and Vocational School, where I went to school. And they had a PA system, which in those days was one way. So from the principal's office, they could press a button and it would go to all the classrooms. There was no way to talk back to them.
Yeah.
And every week or two, the speaker would come on, and there'd be this distortion and stuff, and then somebody says, principal would like to see Paul Hoffert.
Yeah.
And I'd be looking around and say, holy shit, what'd you do now?
And,
And I go to the principal's office and I say, there was a call like for me, and I said, yeah, go and see the principal. And I go and see the principal, and he said, oh yeah, it's we got a call from Haggard Hardy. He's double booked at Studio 4. Can you get down there right away?
Yeah.
And my high school used to take my gigs. That was the only place that people could call.
Call you, yeah.
and they would do that, and it was a little secret that I had. I never told my friends because it was not a cool thing. But anyway, that was it. So my high school had
your friends. I was going to say your friends thought you were getting in trouble every time they
yeah, that's what they thought, and that I was proud of that. That's something that as a kid wears a badge.
Good reputation, yeah.
So anyway, there you go. So that was it, and that was preceded my life as a rock musician.
We'll talk about briefly, how did you become involved in the off-Broadway musical Get Thee to Canterbury?
Okay, that's a good question. When I went to university, just I spent very little time in class. So I did go, I had a triple major in mathematics and physics and chemistry and stuff like that, but I didn't go much to class. What I did do is I hung out with all the people who were doing music stuff. And at University of Toronto, which was a large university, they had these variety shows, sort of like the Harvard Lampoon that people might be familiar with. And at University College, which was the college at U of T that I was in, they had a variety show called UC Follies. And they had comedians and actors and musicians and everything. And I used to be the musical director of that. And the guy who used to produce it and had a comedy act. The comedy act was Lipowitz and Pomerantz. And the producer guy was Lorne Lipowitz. And people might know him better by what his middle name. He was Lorne Michael Lipowitz, who became Lorne Michaels when he
yes.
started
Okay.
Saturday Night Live in New York. And so Lorne Michaels and I were kind of contemporaries who benefited greatly from the Canadian support in those days of young talent. And he and his comedy partner, Hartley Pomerantz, were given their own radio show first. And I became the musical director for that, and then the musical director for their TV show, which was the predecessor for Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
I was at University of Toronto, and I was working with Lorne Michaels and all the other colleges that had their own shows. And one of my fellow students came up to me and said, there's this guy, he's an English major, his name is David Sector, and he's making a movie. And he's probably going to need some music for it. And you do everybody knows you, around the campus as a music guy. Why don't you talk to him? Maybe you could do the music for his movie. So this is a key thing of how I did get to Canterbury. So I'll come back to the topic, but it's my roundabout way. So I met this guy, David Sector. He didn't have any money, but he wanted to make a movie. And University of Toronto didn't have any film production courses or any cameras or anything, but there was a vocational college, Ryerson College in Toronto, that had a course in movie making and cinematography. So this guy, David Sector, partnered with a student at Ryerson where he had access to cameras and microphones and stuff like that. And David just put out a little blurb and said, anybody who wants to act or help write or make a movie. And when I met him, he had already arranged he had a storyboard of the script outline. He didn't have the dialogue, but he had an outline of the thing. And he said, do you want to do music for a movie? And I said, yeah, I go to movies. I love the movies. How hard could it be, right?
Right.
I had no idea the technology involved and everything like that. But anyway, the short version of the story was I made the movie with David. And because we were all making a movie for the first time and had no experience, what sounded at first like I would do the music score was that I would also, record all the dialogue with microphones and do the sound editing. Okay. And help with the editing. And like everybody just, we all sort of pitched in. I did do what turned out to be, I didn't know really what a music score was or how it worked, but I sort of figured out the best I could. And although the movie was made for basically nothing, like the director, producer, writer went around to the companies that were making industrial films in those days, and there was no feature films industry in Canada at all. And at the end of the negative film that they used to shoot for movies, which had all these little frames, they'd have to develop the negatives and then edit it and everything like that. And the film used to have an expiry date. So when they were buying these big rolls of film and shooting them, they would end up with odds and ends of film that were out of date and usually throw them out. So my friend David Sector, went around to all of these film companies, and they gave him for nothing the out of date film, and he used that for that. So they didn't really need much money. They didn't get any permits to shoot anywhere, so they didn't have to pay for anything, and they never got caught. But I said, I'm in a union, I'm in the musicians union, and you have to give me a budget to pay 5 good musicians, and I'll do it for nothing. And he found whatever amount of money he needed to do that. So I hired, as seemed to me the logical thing to do, the drummer, Ed Thigpen, who was with the Oscar Peterson Trio, like all the very top musicians, because everybody worked for scale,
Yeah.
right? So I figured I could get my friends to work on it, but like, why don't I get like the best?
The best.
And I wrote a thing, and it turns out that they sent the film when it was finished off to the Cannes Film Festival.
Wow.
And remarkably, it was they decided to show it in the director's first film section of the Cannes Film Festival, and it won a prize.
And it won. Wow. Is that right? Wow.
So here I was with my friends, all of whom ended up somehow in the television film business. I mean, because it was what a start, right? Because nobody was making feature films. You make a feature film, and it actually gets reviewed, and it goes to then it got another film festival in Edinburgh. Nobody knew where Edinburgh was, but it was far away from Toronto.
Yeah.
And so I met this guy, David Sector. Now here this leads to Get Thee to Canterbury. Okay. About a year after we made this film together, the same fella says he met a guy who has a script for a play based on Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So, I don't know if your listening audience knows who that is. Chaucer was one of the first writers in England to write a book called Canterbury's Tales, and based on that kind of old book written in, I don't know, 1600, 1700, something like that. He made a contemporary play about it, and David said, "Why don't we make it into a musical?" He said, "I'll write the lyrics, and you can write the music, and would you like to do that?" And I said, "Sure." I mean, the world was my oyster, and every time I said, "Sure, why don't I do this?" I had a good time, and it seemed to turn out well more frequently than not. So we wrote this musical, called it Get Thee to Canterbury, and we didn't know anything about how you put on a play or something, or didn't know if we put on a play, but we were at a party, and we met this business guy, and he was asking us what we're up to after the movie that we made, and we said, "Oh, we wrote this musical," and he said, "Well, what do you want to do with it?" And we, of course, said, "Oh, we thought we'd take it to Broadway or off Broadway or something like that." And he said, "Do you have investors and producers and stuff?" We said, "No, not yet. We just like sort of finished it." And he says, he said, "I'm an accountant in a big firm, and we have a lot of wealthy people, and some of them are interested in investing in really risky things like films and musicals." He said, "If you want, I'll give you a backers audition in my home, and I'll invite some of these people, and maybe they'll want to invest some money in your show." We said, "Fine." So we went to his house. He had a nice grand piano in a sort of a mansion kind of house, and there were about 20 people. And David read the in-between, little things of where there would be dialogue, and I sort of sang the songs and played them on the piano. And at the end of the evening, everybody had left, and there were envelopes, and the David Perlmutter, who was the benefactor we had, who had gotten together his some friends of his who left checks to invest in our thing. This was, I believe, 1968, perhaps, just before Lighthouse. And when we tallied up the checks, it was $60,000. Now, to put this in perspective,
That's a lot back then. That's a whole lot back. Yeah.
that's a whole lot.
Yeah.
It was about $700,000 in today's money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had checks. We'd never written a play. We had never made a movie before that either. But we had the money to put on a show in New York. So we went down to New York and we started looking for people who had produced shows and who had stage managed them and casting directors and everything. And we were these guys from Toronto. And they said, have you raised your money yet? And we said, yeah, we have the money to do it. And then everybody was really interested when they found out, because raising money is really hard. And especially New York, everybody's trying to raise money. So we had the budget and we cast the show. And we ended up producing the show, which was probably a big mistake. But anyway, we had fun. And we played at the Sheraton Square Playhouse, I believe, in Greenwich Village. What I call a respectable flop is we played for 6 months.
Okay.
So it was a respectable. We got reviewed by the New York Times and everything. I had mixed reviews, some good, some not so good, and it was enough to stay open for 6 months, but not enough for the investors to recoup their money. But our investors from Toronto were thrilled because they came to New York. They all flew to New York, and they went to Sardi's. We had enough money in our budget to have a little party at Sardi's after. And that's how Get Thee to Canterbury worked.
Yeah.
And while I was in New York, that led to Lighthouse.
Yeah. Well, you had a nice run, like you said, 6 months. That's nice. Well, tell the story how you and Skip Prokop met.
So that story makes more sense than the other stories maybe that I've told, because while I was in New York, so my wife and I, Brenda, who were by that time married with 2 kids who were maybe 2 years old and 4 years old, and so we took a suite at the Fifth Avenue Hotel while the show was running, and had a nanny to look after our kids, and we're having a good time in New York. And one evening, after our show, I went by a rock and roll club in New York called the Electric Circus, I believe, where all the big name rock and roll acts were playing. And that evening, by coincidence, turns out that a Canadian rock and roll band called the Paupers, which were the first Canadian rock and roll band to ever get a US manager. They were managed by Albert Grossman. So those who are aficionados of the pop music scene know that Albert Grossman at the time managed Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, Mamas and the Papas, just a whole catalog of really big name acts. And because of that, he also managed the Paupers, Skip Prokop's band.
Yeah.
And so Skip Prokop's band were playing all through the United States with all the big acts at the time, including at the Electric Circus, where I met Skip Prokop accidentally at the intermission when he came up to me and recognized me. So here I am in New York and I knew about the Paupers. I didn't know Skip. I didn't know the guys in the band. And he said, "You're Paul Hoffert from Toronto, right?" And I said, "Yeah, how would you know that?" And he said, "Oh," he says, "I'm in a rock and roll band, but I really love jazz. And when I'm in Toronto, I always go to the jazz clubs and I ask to sit in. You guys never let me sit in because I have long hair, and at the time there was jazz musicians were not fond of rock and roll musicians.
Right.
Whatever it was, he wasn't wrong. Anyway, we chatted for a minute or so and shook hands and whatever it is, and we said, it'd be great to see you again sometime. And that was it. And I came back and I said to my wife, can you imagine? I went into this, rock club and I met this guy, Skip Prokop from the Paupers, and we had this nice little chat. The next day, I took a flight back to Toronto, and sitting next to me on that Air Canada flight was Skip Prokop. And we had a chance, we had an hour on the flight rather than like 30 seconds in a loud room. And he told me about himself, and he asked me if I like film, and I said, "Do I like film? I've scored a film and I played at the Calvin." And he said, "Oh my gosh," he said, "I love film scores." He says, I love the Westerns when, you see they come over the horizon and you hear the French horns and all the strings and orchestral stuff.
Oh, yes.
And he said, it's just like my passion. And he said, "And I also like jazz." And he said, but he says, I've come up through this rock and roll thing. And last night was the last night of my band, the Paupers. We split up, actually. We didn't announce it from the stage. We started talking with each other about what our passions were and what we were doing. And he knew a bit about me, that I was a jazz musician and I was working in recording studios and stuff like that. And I said to him, "What are you going to do now that your band's broken up?" He said, "Well, my manager also manages Janis Joplin, and her record company, last year she was just Janis Joplin, and now she's Janis Joplin."
Yeah.
And she's a big star, and her band isn't good enough, isn't deemed by her recording company to be good enough to record with, because it's just a bar band, which is what Janis Joplin was. She had a bar band until she became Janis Joplin. And so he asked me to put together a new band for Janis. I'm going to go on the road with Joplin and do that. But he said, "The thing is, I'm having problems with my meetings with Joplin." And I said, "Oh, what kind of problems?" He says, "Well," he said, "I went to one of her rehearsals with her band, and she the people in the band, the musicians, are basically not great, but the real problem is the guitar player, who is just not a good enough guitar player, not only to go into the recording studio, but he's the biggest problem with the band. So I've identified a much better guitar player playing in the US and actually out of Detroit, and I'd like to bring him into the band, but she's resisting this." And he says, "I'm not optimistic of convincing her for two reasons. First of all, the guitar player, I won't mention his name, but people can look it up. The guitar player is her boyfriend and her drug dealer. So," and he said, "This is not a scene that I wanted, so it may not work out." And then he said, "But, I've had this idea." He said, "I love this film music thing." And he said, "You probably know about the Beatles." And I said, "Yeah, everybody knows about the Beatles."
Who knows? Who doesn't? Yeah, who doesn't?
Yeah, but he said, "You know why they stopped touring? Everybody says it's because of Yoko Ono and stuff." I said, "How would I know? I don't know." He said, "Well, the real reason is they started recording with George Martin as their producer, And he started bringing in studio musicians like piccolo trumpets and string orchestras. And then once they did Magical Mystery Tour and the subsequent, they couldn't tour anymore because they couldn't replicate their albums.
Yeah.
So long as they were basically a four-piece rock and roll band,
They could, yeah.
they could go and play all the big arenas. But in those days, they didn't even have traveling sound consoles with enough inputs
Yes.
to do that with all the stuff they needed. So he said, I've had this idea to put together a rock and roll band that could perform all the orchestral stuff. It would have strings and horns and a rock and roll rhythm section and background vocals and all of these musical resources, but could perform live every single thing that we recorded. I think that the audiences would really enjoy that, because rock is becoming more complicated and orchestral, yada yada. So he said, and come to think of it, I would need to have a guy like you to do it, because I come through the rock background, but I don't know the studio musicians, I don't know the jazz musicians who could, play the trumpets and saxophones and all of that. And I don't know the string players. I don't know how to write music for strings. I need somebody who can do orchestration, yada, yada, yada. And he said, if the thing with Janice doesn't work out, would you be interested in maybe talking about putting a band together? Because I think we have very intersecting musical histories and talents that would work well for that. And reportedly by Skip in his memoirs, I said, that's great. If you decide to do it in Toronto, give me a call. So 2 weeks later, I got a call from Skip, whose thing with Janice didn't turn out. And that's how I met Skip Prokop. And that's how we ended up putting together Lighthouse, by a bunch of other incredibly fortunate, unlikely coincidences, which started out with, how do you put a band together? And Skip, who knew more than me and whose manager was Albert Grossman, had a leg up because he had an entree to the record companies and to the managers and to all of that kind of stuff. So we wrote 4 or 5 songs together in 1 or 2 days. And we took them down to New York. And by means of a very interesting but very long story that I will leave out for now, purposes of this interview, we managed to, the first call we made to a record company to try to get a record deal was to the company that where Skip knew the A&R, the artist and repertory guy who looks for new talent, because they had signed his band, the Paupers. So it's Verve Records in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And so we called him up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and Skip got to talk to this guy, and he said, oh, it's Skip from the Paupers. I broke up the Paupers. I have a new band I'm putting together with a friend of mine who's here. That's terrific. And he gives him the whole pitch, and said, we made a demo. Could we drop it off, and could you get somebody to listen to it at the record company? And I hear at the other end, the guy says, sure, it's 10 o'clock. Why don't you come over at 11 o'clock? So this is great. So we go to MGM Verve at that time. And Skip says, I have an appointment with so-and-so. And the A&R guy comes out and says, come in. And contrary to everything I had heard about getting a demo listened to at a record company, giving it to a secretary or an assistant, nobody listening to it, so the way it was, the way it is. And he said, well, let's go into one of the listening rooms. I'd like to hear it. And this A&R guy listens to it. And after listening to the 4 or 5 songs, Skip says, so what do you think? And the guy pauses for a minute and he says, I think I get it. And we said, you get it? He says, I get it and I like it. And so we're wondering what it is that he gets. Because we know it is what it is that we got. What we got is what Skip told me is that the Beatles can't go on tour. So we'll have a band with a big orchestra. You guys probably realize that all of the big record companies have been making money, the pop side of it, with the big band era, when Frank Sinatra and all those big bands. And because the big bands all have horns and many of them have string orchestras as well, Guy Lombardo and all of those kind of things, we have completed the sales circle because all the young people who buy records go to school, and their schools all have marching bands where they play trumpets and trombones and clarinets and saxophones, and school orchestras where they play with string players and everything. And so our publishing companies publish dance band music. It gets into the public, it gets into the school system, it gets into the universities, they listen to the records, and we sell tons of records. Now that this new rock and roll thing is happening, it's all just drums and guitars. And it doesn't work. So we can't figure out how can we get these new rock bands, how can we take the popular music that's starting to become the important music and use it in the school system to do it. And you guys have figured it out. And we looked at him and we said, yeah, that's what we were thinking too. So, so he says, I want to play this for some of my other colleagues. But he says, I like the music. It's really original. And we said, oh, good. He said, why don't you guys go have lunch and come back after lunch? So we went and we had lunch. We came back after lunch at 1 o'clock. And again, the short version, much shortened version of the story was that MGM Verve offered us a record deal on the spot, so long as we would sign it right away, because they felt that the fact that we went to them first, that we were going to be a really hot item with a lot of competition, and they wanted to sign us before we took our demo to any other record company. And because of that, they were willing to, on the spot, the same day as we phoned them to get a meeting, give us a record contract, give Skip and I $15,000 each as a signing bonus, non-recoupable, fly our band, as yet to be named, from Toronto to New York to record at Electric Ladyland, where Hendrix was recording, and all that thing, put us up in a hotel on Times Square, which sounded great to us. Anyway, and they said in those days it was pre-computer, and they had typewriters. And they said, we've asked several of our stenographers and typists to stay along with our vice president of legal, and we'll draft a contract, and you can sign it, and vice president of finance will cut you the checks, and you can walk out of here at 5 o'clock with a signed record deal. So you guys probably want to think about it. They said, we'll go out of the room and take a half hour, but we're going to be back in a half hour, and either the deal's off or you take the deal, and we're going to make a deal. And they left the room, and I looked at Skip and he looked at me, and we said, like, what the fuck?
What's there to think about? Right?
Yeah, of course we're going to take the deal. There's no way we're not going to take the deal. So we take the deal, we wait, and we walk away with the checks. That's how Lighthouse got started.
Okay. Okay.
So we had a record deal
Uh-huh.
before we had a band,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we just had a demo. And then, of course, the next day, we went to Albert Grossman's office, and Albert Grossman was well aware that the Porpers were breaking up and that his idea to put Skip and Janice's band wasn't working out because he was the manager. And so Skip introduced me to Albert Grossman and said, Albert, we made a demo, and I know how hard it is to get a record deal for you guys as managers. We have a record deal. It's signed, everything. But we need a manager so we could get gigs to play live gigs. And he told Albert our idea for the band. And Albert said, worst idea I've ever heard. He said, it's terrible. He said, not only won't I be involved, but I strongly, strongly suggest that you put the idea out of your mouth. He said, a 13-piece band. He said, I just tried a band called the Electric Flag, which was a 9-piece horn band. And we went on their first tour. I lost $100,000 because of the cost of traveling, accommodation, breaking a band with all of that kind of stuff, breaking the mold of. So we have a new rule that I'm not going to sign any more bands with more than 5 people. So, okay, that didn't work out. Everything seemed magically positive up until then. As we're walking out of Albert's office, a young guy who was an accountant who managed Albert Grossman's publishing companies, among other things, which meant that he published Bob Dylan's music for anybody interested in how much money they make on that thing. And he says hello to Skip, says, hi, Skip, how's everything? And Skip says, hi, this is my new partner, Paul Hoffert. We're from Toronto, and we put together a deal. We got a record contract, and we just offered it to Albert to manage us. And he said he doesn't want to do it because the band's too big. He said it's a terrible idea. It's doesn't make any sense. And Vinny says, I think Albert's nuts. He says it makes all the sense in the world. And Vinny understood the Beatle touring thing because he was in that sort of side of the business.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll manage you guys. He says, you think Albert Grossman actually answers the telephone? Like when people call up and they want to book a band or do this? I come every morning. I'm here at 7:30 in the morning. I say, it's Vinny Fusco from the Albert Grossman Agency. And I look after whatever it is. And then I tell Albert what I've done. He said, I'll manage your band, and I'll do it from the office. So I'll call up, booking agents, and I'll say it's Vinny Fusco from the Albert Grossman Agency. He's a great band called Lighthouse. Didn't have a name. Anyway, he says, I'll do this. So he says, why don't you sign with me? So we signed with Vinny Fusco, and then Vinny renegotiated the entire MGM deal and dropped MGM, who had given us the advance that we've already had started to spend to buy houses and things like that. And he renegotiated our original deal with RCA Victor so that RCA Victor would pay off MGM not only for the money that they had committed, but gave them an override of a couple of percentage points of royalties on the first 2 RCA albums. And the RCA record deal that Vinny renegotiated was for about $1 million and included a first guaranteed sold out concert at Carnegie Hall in New York. That's how that happened, because it was in our recording contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how Lighthouse got started. So Lighthouse never played in bars. Skip did all of that. Then, so anyway, now we have this huge recording deal, right? And we have, we're managed through the Albert Grossman Agency, although I don't think Albert knew about it. But But it didn't matter. But we hit by Vinnie Fusco, who everybody knew was Albert Grossman's guy. And we still didn't have a band. So now we had to phone the guys who had recorded. So when I recorded the demo, Skip got, initially Skip was in charge of the rhythm section and vocalists and, and the rock people, because he knew them all and was working with them. And I was sort of in charge. So I got I found 4 string players who were playing in a Toronto symphony, who were in their early 20s and who were getting stoned every time they were going to perform Brahms or something, and wanted to be part of this whole thing that was happening with the pop music scene. And I hired them to play on the demo and also to be in the band, which they were thrilled. And then I got the 4 horn players that I got. To give you an idea of the caliber that they were, the trombone player, who still plays with Lighthouse, Russ Liu, he's older than I am. He's 84.
Yeah.
After Lighthouse, he played with Count Basie and his orchestra, and Woody Herman, and our lead trumpet player. No, our second trumpet player went to play in the Duke Ellington orchestra. So I mean, I had like the cream of the crop. Our first saxophone player, Howard Shore, you may know, is of course multi Grammy Award winning, multi Oscar winning for his film scores, who was Lorne Michaels' best friend. So Howard, when Lorne Michaels, contemporaneous to us starting Lighthouse, about 9 months or a year later, Lorne Michaels starts Saturday Night Live and phones his good friend Howard Shore, who was playing sax with us, to come to New York and be the music director of Saturday Night Live, which helped Howard Shore get in films and everything. So there was a lot of incestuous stuff going up. It was a ton of fun, and that was the beginning. And Vinny booked us right after our first U.S. date was at Carnegie Hall. And immediately thereafter, he booked us as the opening act for the Jefferson Airplane, going on tour playing 50,000 seat arenas across the United States. And so, and then we had a band that we learned how to be a band.
Yeah. Well, who came up with the name Lighthouse? Where did that come from, Lighthouse?
Okay, so we go back to Toronto, and I speak with Skip, and we say, okay, so now we have to hire guys, and we start talking about what do we have to do a band. And I had never done a band like that. I played in a jazz band. There's nothing to do with this whole scene. So we need a name for the band. So we solicit suggestions from family and friends, as people sometimes do, and nothing really stuck. And in addition to our passion for film music, Skip and I shared another passion, which was keeping tropical fish as a hobby. So we both had fish tanks. And one day, Skip phones me up and says, a little 30-gallon tank I have in my living room? I said, yeah. He said, in the rear back corner is a little ceramic lighthouse. And he said, what do you think? And I said, what do we think about what? He said, what do you think about the name Lighthouse for the band? And as I recall, I thought of associations, Lighthouse, a safe haven, and rocky waters. At the time the Vietnamese War was going on, and there was peaceniks. They seemed to have a lot of nice ideas. So I said, yeah. And that's how we got the name. And it almost didn't work, because 3 days before the Carnegie Hall first concert, we got a call from the lawyer of Lighthouse for the Blind,
Oh, did you? Okay.
saying they had a trademark and why we were being so mean to blind people. It was terrible. So what are we going to do? So now the posters and everything were printed for the gig. What to do. So we hired a lawyer, and the lawyer got back to the Lighthouse organization for the blind and made a deal. They said that we would never solicit, never claim to have anything to do with blind people. And they would never put out rock and roll records. And they said, okay. I wasn't involved in the negotiation. So that's how the name started, with a tropical fish.
In
And
an aquarium, yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
how it came.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the Lighthouse for the Blind. I don't know. Are they still an organization? Because I remember
We are,
they used to come knocking on your door.
yeah.
Yeah. I remember that when I was growing up. I remember that they would come, around and knocking and asking, for donations and things like that. Well, yeah, the band itself, the sound. I know there's comparisons to Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But you guys, what stood out, you had the strings. I think that's what helped you, stand out from those bands. Do you remember a band Chase? Do you remember Chase?
Sure, Bill
Okay.
Chase.
Yep. That was another one, Bill Chase.
Yeah, there was a bunch of other ones, and
Yeah.
we knew all the others. First of all, Blood, Sweat, and Tears had a close, and to set the historic record straight, from my perspective, and of course I looked into it, but also I lived through this stuff. Blood, Sweat, and Tears was first. They were the first horn band. I'm trying to think of the name of the keyboard player, Al Cooper.
Yeah, Al Cooper.
Who was the leader and the keyboard player, and who also had played when Bob Dylan went electric. He played Hammond organ on all this stuff. Al Cooper played in a band with Skip Prokop called Super Session.
Oh, did he? Okay.
It was a rock and roll quartet, like keyboards, guitar, bass, and drums. And so Skip was well aware of what was going on with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And when we were thinking of putting together Lighthouse, we chatted with those guys. And shortly after the original Blood, Sweat, and Tears record, David Clayton Thomas became the lead singer, who's Canadian.
Right.
And we knew David from the Yorkville scene in Canada, the pop music scene in Canada. So that was a relationship between Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Lighthouse. And then Chicago came next. And Chicago had, whereas Blood, Sweat, and Tears basically had a kind of jazz horn section, and the rhythm section was also very jazzy. Lighthouse had a jazz kind of horn section, but the rhythm section was totally a rock and roll rhythm section, who played, later when we started touring with Miles Davis and people like that, they were intrigued by the fact that we were doing improvisation, but instead of the swing beat, which is jazz musicians do, people may not get this, but musicians will all get it, where you syncopate it, dun 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 dun, right? That's a that's the syncopated underlying thing of jazz. In rock and roll, it's what we call straight eighth notes. It's dot 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 dot. So while the jazz-oriented band's doing the thing with doing the syncopated jazz kind of rhythms on and off, Lighthouse was like steamroller rock and roll, with the horn players still doing their soloing in that. So musicians could easily tell there was a difference, but if you looked at it on paper, you had Blood, Sweat and Tears and Lighthouse and Chicago playing. And when we first heard Chicago, and especially quickly after they, like us, had initial recordings that were not that successful, but within a year or so, figured out, Chicago was originally what CTA, Chicago Transit Authority,
Transit Authority, yeah.
was even called Chicago.
Yeah.
So I would say there was, I'm projecting my band's viewpoint on the other bands, but I think I'm safe to say, because over the years we've crossed paths and so many times, that we had a friendly rivalry, but we only were able to compete once. And they probably won't tell you about this because we lost the competition. The Isle of Wight Festival.
Isle of Wight, yeah, yeah.
An island off the coast of the UK.
Yeah.
At which probably the greatest aggregation of pop performers ever performed, and they had 300,000 people attend. It was like huge, much bigger than Woodstock. At that festival, on the stage, were at different times were Lighthouse, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Chicago. So the British version of, I think, Billboard magazine or something, I'm trying to think, I can't recall the name of it, decided to run best big band of the festival audience competition of some kind. Anyway, at the time I wasn't even aware of it, but Lighthouse won.
Yeah,
and as a result,
yeah.
at the Isle of Wight Festival, if you look it up, every single artist got to perform once over the 3 or 4 days, except for Lighthouse, who was brought back for a second performance the closing night because we won the Battle of the Big Bands.
An encore encore.
So,
Yeah.
I a little bragging here.
Yeah, right.
But we all respect each other. It's
yeah.
really great bands, and
Yeah.
certainly maybe 4 or 5 years later, in the latter years of Lighthouse's classic being together, we had a trumpet player who had played with Bill Chase. So there was that connection.
That connection, yeah.
And then with the current version of Lighthouse, which has been together about 35 years.
Yeah.
We've had certainly, we had one of our trumpet players was formerly with Tower of Power. And
another one.
there were always,
right.
big bands. And once
Yeah.
we started doing the classic rock tours about maybe 7 or 8 years ago,
Yeah.
which was from that period of classic rock, we met a lot of the guys who were still alive and or still able to play, because we're all old geezers. I mean, we're all old people who've been around for a long time.
Right.
And guys like Russ Little and myself, who are from the original Lighthouse demo and recording, which was, I don't know, 55, 56 or something years ago. We have to work hard, like exercising and everything, because it's hard to, you're getting older, and people who think that it's easy for the Rolling Stones and bands like that to decide to, to get on a road and do what they do. They're really fantastic, aside from being fantastic musicians. And of course, we have the youngest guy in Lighthouse now is 26.
Yeah.
There's a range of guys, but Lighthouse still performs. And I get up every morning and I do practice an hour of piano, an hour of vibes, 2 hours of exercise. Because if I don't do that, then I need oxygen in my dressing room.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to hear this. What was CanCon? And talk about how you and Skip were instrumental in pushing CanCon through Parliament.
Yes, absolutely. So before CanCon, which happened in part, but in no small measure, because of Skip Prokop and myself testifying at the government hearings on CanCon is a shortened form of Canadian content. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, there was problems with all sorts of cultural products like movies and television shows and music recordings and books. Because the center of European and North American pop culture was really the United States without question, because they had a big population, roughly 10 times the size of Canada. So because that was the only place where you could have enough of an audience to have enough of a budget to produce first quality stuff, it's where everybody needed to go. You needed to go to Hollywood or New York or maybe Chicago if you're music, and make it there. And Skip and his band, like every other Canadian artist, realized that if you didn't have US distribution for your recordings, if you didn't have a US record company, you would just be a local band, but you would never be able to really compete in the international market. So people who were much more educated and smarter than I am sat down in the Canadian government and decided over a 5-year period that, not because of the monetary aspect principally, but because of the cultural aspect, that Canadian culture was just becoming American culture, because all the books we read, all the TV programs we watched, and all the records we listened to were American, reflecting the US South, the US East, everything, but not Yorkville Street in Toronto and not the prairies of Canada and not our country. That the government of Canada might have a role in trying to promote the availability, not so much usage. The government said they didn't want to tell Canadian people that they had to listen to or watch Canadian stuff, but they wanted to make it available. And since it wasn't available, and when they looked at the music business, there was no availability, because the marketing and promotion of music up until the internet and streaming was almost 100% radio based. Radio stations, because you would walk into a record store and there would be hundreds of different titles, and how would you know what you wanted to buy, except that you would listen to some radio stations and some friends and doing it. So primarily, radio was where you did it. Now, US radio stations, which had a much greater market, and when I say US radio stations, I should be more specific, because when we talked about US, we really meant large urban areas in the US, like New York and large population areas, which could support the sale regionally of enough records to make it worthwhile for a record company to put out a record in New York if you got played on a New York pop music AM station. There were none of those kind of places in Canada. So what would happen is, in our large urban areas, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, it was about 4 was about it. And whereas New York and those other places were 10 million, 20 million, those kind of things, we were like a million, about a tenth the size. So our radio stations had much smaller budgets and were much more profitable, because they just bought Billboard magazine every month. And if you had a top 30 station, then you would look at the Billboard top 30 charts and you would play those records. And you wouldn't need to have a DJ that chose the material who was a musically literate person. You just needed to have a DJ who knew how to put the needle down record and your playlist. And if you wanted R&B or soul, they had all of these US charts. We did not have that in Canada. So you couldn't get Canadian music in Canada. So in order to make the Canadian music available on radio and to make Canadian television programs available on Canadian home screens, the government came up with this idea, which was the deal was sort of sealed when Skip and I got to testify, because most of the people testifying were music publishing, Canadian music publishers, Canadian record companies, Canadian recording studios, who all had economic, industrial reasons for having government support, because they needed to be able to put out first quality stuff. And unless radio was going to play the records that they were making, there was no point in them making them. It wasn't a big thing. But then when Skip and I came, and Skip had the very best story to tell, I think, because his band, the Paupers, was a Canadian band that started out in Canada with a Canadian manager and couldn't get their records released in the United States until they got Albert Grossman to be their American manager. He got them an American deal. Then he became an American star and was able to do all of that. And I just knew the Canadian end of it, which was that I had from time to time recorded in New York and Los Angeles and the other thing, because I was a professional musician doing different kind of stuff. And without a doubt, the recording studios, the stopwatches, everything to do with the professional making of records wasn't available in Canada, including the A&R people who would be choosing who the Canadian recording artists were, because the Canadian record companies did just what the radio stations did. They basically had repertoires of all these American artists. They had marketing and promotional budgets for North America, which were American budgets for billboards and all of this thing. And they did not release records of American artists who didn't reach gold and platinum status. It was just this giving the top of the thing, all of the artists who were being promoted in Canada that they didn't have to spend money on because it was part of the US thing. And that didn't happen. So the government idea was this thing called CanCon, and they came up with a scheme that for radio airplay, radio stations could, at their own discretion, choose 30% of their material that had to be deemed Canadian. Not a list of points, you know, who wrote the song, who played the song, where was it recorded, that kind of thing. And record companies, likewise, had to have Canadian content, which was based on who wrote the songs and where they were recorded and who the artist was. So it didn't have to be all Canadian, 100% Canadian, but you had to have a percentage of your stuff had to be Canadian content. And if it wasn't, if you were a radio station, then basically you couldn't get your license renewed. So they had to do it. They forced people to do it. And in the United States and in other countries, Great Britain, record companies and people in the industry were pissed off because we were taking some of their action, which they had automatically been getting. But in Canada, I was there when the strategy totally worked. It worked better than anybody could have expected, because up until CanCon, all of our audiences and all of us understood that the quality of Canadian content in general was not as good as the quality of American content, for all the reasons that I just went through. So what happened was, once the recording studios realized that there would be more recording, they got better equipment, they hired better, we started hiring engineers from New York and Los Angeles, and all of that kind of stuff started happening. Over time, the success of the CanCon in the music side became so obvious and so hard to deny, because if you go and look at who the top 10 Billboard recording artists were before CanCon, and then over the next 15 or 20 years, you'll see that Canadian artists started dominating the top 10 in the United States after they started getting played in Canada, where they had some content, requirements. So around that time, and over the last couple of decades, many times Canadian artists have suggested that the government revisit it. And some Canadian artists feel that now that Canadian artists are not only established, but now that we have the internet, where everything can come from anywhere and it doesn't matter, but now that you can do all of this stuff, that the playing field has been leveled a bit, and they don't want to feel that they're being artificially boosted because of a government regulation. And others don't feel that way. Certainly, it has to do with how popular you are.
Yeah.
Once you're in the, CanCon doesn't do much for Lighthouse.
Yeah.
And didn't do too much for Lighthouse when we started out, because we had a record deal with RCA Victor.
Right.
And they promoted the heck out of us in England and Japan, in the United States, and in Canada.
Yeah.
So once that whole thing started happening. So that's a brief resume from my personal opinion of Canada.
Well, of CanCon. Well, the band became hugely popular in Canada. Beginning in '71, came 3 successive Juno Awards for the band, and Lighthouse Live was Canada's first platinum album. So those are some feathers for your cap, or for the band right there. Why did you leave the band in '73? You would stay on as executive producer, but why did you leave the band?
I left the band for a saccharine sweet reason. My kids started to go to school, and when, for the 3 or 4 years that I was playing in Lighthouse, I was touring constantly, like, in order to, the prognosis that Lighthouse was a bad business idea was very correct. We played the one number that can be proven is Howard Shore, who was the original saxophone player, kept track of every gig that he played with Lighthouse. And in the maybe 2 years that he was, 2 or 3 years that he was in Lighthouse, it was over 1,000 gigs. So we were playing 200 plus dates, mostly in the United States, a year, and recording 2 to 3 albums. So whenever we weren't touring, we were writing songs and recording. And, I come home from a tour and it's hard to keep a family together. So my personal reason, our kids started to go to school. I come back from a tour after 30 or 60 days on the road. And one of our kids would say, "Oh, daddy, 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 it's good to see you. How come you didn't come to my birthday party?" "Oh, well, I was on tour."
Yeah, yeah.
"Oh, but my friend Johnny's father is an accountant and he comes to all of his birthday parties." And so it was a combination of a bit of guilt about our kids, but mostly I realized that I was totally missing. Like if I was away for a month, when your kids are just, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, if you don't see them for a month, then you're missing a whole part of your life that you realize that you can never replicate, or it's unlikely to replicate at a time. So I came off the road because I wanted to spend more time with my kids. And I think it's, if not miraculous, it's certainly much against the odds that my marriage to my wife, an original sweetheart since we were 14 years old, but that survived. But it was not easy. And a lot of times before our kids went to school, we took our kids on the road a lot, and we have a nanny. So, and then the kids came on the road, and then they once they started becoming like 5, 6, 7 years old, and they say, "How come you tell me that cigarettes are bad for you, but now everybody's smoking?" "Oh, but those aren't cigarettes, that's dope. It's okay, you can smoke. You can smoke weed.
Yeah.
That's not bad for you." It didn't work, it wasn't working out. So
Yeah.
that's why I didn't do it. I stayed in the band as the executive producer.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know that there are a couple of albums that my participation is mislabeled. And it doesn't matter to me at all, because I actually have never cared what credits I get for anything, because to me, it's all in the process. And, I've had more than my due of accolades and stuff like that. But I actually, because I can recognize my keyboard playing.
You know
So
it's you. Yeah.
so even after Sam C became the keyboard player, and maybe Larry Smith, I can't remember which was first. We had some other really good keyboard players.
Yeah.
But when we do some of those songs now,
Yeah.
I remember their parts. And then in some cases, I didn't play the keyboard parts, but I still did some of the arrangements. So I
Yeah.
was involved with the band, and that wasn't an issue for anybody in the band. But that became an issue 20 years later when we rebanded, if you want to call it
Yeah.
that. Got
Yeah.
together, and we decided that that we would become a permanent part-time band, so the kids could spend some time either with their, by then a lot of the guys in the band were music teachers in high school. Skip, my partner, was a DJ on a radio station, and people had other things that they wanted to do. And so when we got together again, we decided to do enough gigs, which was, for us, it's been for the last 30 years or so.
Yeah.
Generally between 15 and 25 gigs a year.
Oh,
So
okay.
on the high side, you're talking about 2 a month on average. More
Yeah.
than that in the summertime when it's festival season. Less than that in the wintertime when people are going down south for the
Yeah.
weather and stuff to Texas, and we have a home in Florida
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something like that. So
Well,
that's it.
before we get to the new release coming out, I want to mention I have a copy of the best of Sunny Days Again, um, and I want to mention my favorites. You tell me if you guys are still playing these live, these songs. Of course, the first hit, One Fine Morning. I imagine you guys play that.
Yes.
Okay.
with Lighthouse, we have one advantage that the other bands don't have in general. I'm not saying every other band, but our biggest advantage in terms of retaining musicians is that we have a huge amount of improvising in our live shows that's not reflected in our recordings.
Right.
So we have a song that might be 4 minutes on a recording.
Yeah.
Might be 15 minutes.
Yeah. Right. See,
So and so we get our rocks off.
right. See,
And we spread that
that's what
throughout the band.
I was going to say. That's what I like about going to see a live show is it's different. The song is different than the recording.
Totally different.
That's what is enjoyable about a live. What's the point of going to a live show to hear exactly what it sounds like on the record? I mean, you could just sit home and listen to the record.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't met
Mhm.
many musicians who wouldn't much rather do just what you said.
Yeah.
Stay home because the sound's going to be better.
Yeah.
You can put a set of headphones on if somebody doesn't make too much noise and listen.
Right.
And you can dissect it, and you can put it on pause.
Pause it. Yeah. Exactly.
Now, but I mean, now you got everything streamed in this. You just put it on pause. You can go back and say, "What chord was that?"
Right. Well,
So you got to go to a live show, and I usually say, if somebody asks me a question of live versus, what do I like and why do I?
Yeah.
The only reason I'm still in a band,
Yeah,
touring and playing, is because I get my rocks off every time you get on stage. Every single show, it's like jumping off a cliff and hoping you're going to have a soft landing and realize that you never will. And it's the uncertainty and it's the danger.
Yeah.
So dangerous that is very exciting.
Just wanted to finish up off of that collection, the 4 more favorites of mine: Little Kind Words, Take It Slow, Silver Bird, and then I think I emailed you my favorite track from the band, Pretty Lady.
All of those are in just about every Lighthouse show.
Every light. Okay.
The only one that gets rotated out sometimes is Little Kind Words, and only if it's an outdoor arena for the reason I mentioned before. It's a beautiful, intimate little song with a harpsichord kind of thing.
Yes.
And also when you're doing those rock festival things. So if we're playing a Lighthouse show in a theater, we're usually doing a couple of hour and a bit sets, so you have maybe 2.5 hours of music. When you're playing a festival, if you're lucky, you get an hour, right?
Right.
So now you start out, you say, well, we're fortunate enough, we got these golden platinum like records. You're not going to do a show and not play One Fine Morning or Sunny Days or those songs without people throwing rocks at you and stuff like that.
Right.
So you put those together with the other things. So you have a good popular taste as well as standards. Excellent question. I'm almost never asked that question, and people never go to the trouble of telling me what what they listen to. So I appreciate that very much, Greg. And
oh, you're welcome. Sure. That's me. That's just me being a music fan too. So well, talk a little bit about hold up the new album and talk a little bit about the new release.
Okay, so after all of this time, we've been having ongoing discussions for the last 8 or 10 years with Anthem Entertainment, the company that publishes the Lighthouse classic era songs, the ones you've mentioned, and also has Anthem Records, which is the headliner. You've probably heard of a band called Rush.
Yeah, it seems to me I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so Rush is another Canadian band, and they conglomerated with this publishing company to form, and we're on that record company called Anthem Records. So we're on Anthem Records, and they have our publishing, and they've been great. And they've been trying to figure out how to attract a new, younger audience that hasn't seen Lighthouse live. A lot of the younger audience members that we've had are because friends or family have said, "Oh, I'm going to see this band. They were really big when I was younger, and you got to hear." Then they tell their friends and everything. So we get some spin-off, but they can't make money. The record company can't make money by selling thousands of records. They want to sell hundreds of thousands, millions of records. So the record company basically came back. They did a bunch of research, and they said that outside of Canada and the United States in particular, because we haven't toured in the United States for 30 years, that basically very few young people have heard of Lighthouse or know who they are. So they've decided that they need to reintroduce the non-Canadian public, where we continue to sell against all odds, actually even CDs to the older folks and now LPs for the younger folks, to reintroduce Lighthouse to the global market and hope that they get some support from the media, as it's, today it's social media, but all of that kind of thing. And to do that, their research showed that most of the music that we play in our sets comes from this one record called One Fine Morning that has a lot of really great songs on it. And so it took 8 years for them to agree to reissue that record, but make it new. So how do you make something new? Because nobody wants to just, a reissue is a reissue. You can go on Spotify and listen to the old versions of One Fine Morning, and there's no need to buy a new record. So they decided to put out an anniversary edition of One Fine Morning with two main differences that are substantial. The first difference was some of the guys in the band, but especially myself, have been into digital technology, AI, using it in music and everything like that, and realized that over the last few years, it's now possible to unmix a mixed recording of any vintage. So there are products, including one product that comes with the Apple, it's called Unmixed Stems or something like that. And you just click on a box that says, bass, drums, guitar, vocal, whatever it is. And that will automatically remove perfectly all the drums or whatever the other thing, and give you another track with what's left without the drums. So if you want to replace the drums,
that's like having your own mixing board.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do was, because we went back and listened to the mixes on the One Fine Morning album, which was our 4th album, and we thought that they were not only good, but very reflective of 1970, which is when that record was recorded. And we didn't want to change history, and we didn't want to, on this reissue, re-record everything, because then it would be that. We wanted the mind trick that we mentioned to the record company is, if you could have a universe that we lived in that had a time machine that could take the musicians who we were back then at the age we were, somehow transport them in today's technology, what would we come up with? And so we did. So I looked after unmixing all of the songs, so we got back to the component tracks. Then I up-resed the tracks, because remember, people compare LPs today two LPs in 1970, there's no comparison at all. In 1970, LPs, which was what everybody listened to and what everybody pressed, the major industrial process that the record companies added was how light can you make the vinyl biscuit starts being a Barbie doll, then they throw them into a hopper. And then if you want to get a good pressing, you don't use Barbie dolls, you use vinyl. And if you want to, if you want one that will skip a little and scratch and have some hiss, you put in used vinyl, you mix it up, you put a hot press on a thing, and you get a thing. The lighter, the less amount of vinyl you use, the cheaper it is, and the less amount of time that the stamper stamps down on the record, the cheaper it is, because factories open for 24 hours a day. If they can stamp twice as many records in a day. So the quality of the products, now the quality of the products weren't that much a problem in the 1960s and 1970s because people were using needles before they called them styluses. I mean, people were using cheap, record players that were all hissy and poppy. We called it Rice Krispies snap.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So the record company said they're going to use the heaviest biscuit. And so when we unmixed it, we were able to res it up to, instead of 16 bits, which is on regular CDs. So we resed everything up to 32-bit. And instead of using, 44K sample rate, which they use on CDs. So we resed everything up to much better than CD quality and pressed all of the LPs that are in this special reissue so that they sound fantastic. They sound as good as, if you play it on a good machine, it really sounds fantastic. And so that was one of the records of the two CDs, of the two LPs, is much better sound. Oh, and then we remixed it. And we remixed it. We didn't have, when we mixed in 1970, you couldn't put a lot of low frequencies like bass guitar or just low frequencies in the bass on a recording, because if you did, the tracks became too wide and the record would skip. So you had to compress the bass and you had to lower the amount of bass. You couldn't put a good amount of highs on, because as soon as you had a lot of high frequencies, it would burn out the cutting head of the thing. So it
was a lot of mid-range. It was a lot of mid-range.
A lot of mid-range, but the wonderful LP vinyl sound that everybody loves was a very distorted sound, pleasantly distorted because of the technology. But we decided that now that you can press records with a heavy biscuit and a long pressing time, because you can charge a lot more for them. They weren't, they were the cheapo things back then. Now, if you buy an LP, if it's made well with a heavy biscuit and a long press, they sound fantastic, way better. So we unmixed it, then remixed the super fidelity version of it, and that's one of the records. The other thing that all our fans told us, they really want to get to know, they really would rather listen to a podcast like yours than just read liner notes. They want to know the personal stuff. They want to know the intimate details, and they want to hear the failures as well as the successes. They want to hear the process. Because of that, we added a second LP, and fortunately, when we went through all the archives, which Brenda and I have been squirreling away in university archives and stuff like that, we were able to find 10 of the demos that were submitted for the One Fine Morning album, 5 of which were rejected, and never made it onto the album, and 5 of which were accepted and made it onto the album. But, for example, One Fine Morning, which you're familiar with as a song, was sung on the released recording by our then brand new lead singer, Bob McBride. But the demo that Skip Prokop, my partner and drummer, the demo that he made was himself singing, and he was playing cowbell on it, and I was playing conga drums, and our guitar player was playing guitar. And that's a demo. It sounds more like a Santana
Yeah.
thing than a Lighthouse thing. So we have that demo. We found in the same song, in this particular case, we found the lyrics that Skip hand wrote for One Fine Mornings, in which he was still changing the lyrics so that you can see them crossed out and that. And we've put the extra LP that has these 5 demo cuts. Now, to make a fine point on this, neither myself nor any of the guys in Lighthouse had ever heard these demos, because they all went to our producer, and he didn't want to, the guys in the band didn't want us to have, I'm the music director, Skip was the leader. They didn't want us to have any interference with choosing the songs, because they all were sure that their songs weren't chosen because of a rigged system, which they never were. But anyway, so this was a revelation to myself, hearing these demos. Some of them are just like guitar or piano and voice, and some of them are complete. Like there's one tune that's on this that we had the multi-tracks for, that was written by Howard Shore, our most famous Lighthouse guy, and Larry Smith. It's a fantastic song. Never made it onto the album. It wasn't what our producer was looking for. It didn't fit with the album. I mean, now that people just drop things and then put them together, the whole idea in the 1960s and 70s that was new was the long form of putting them in a certain order. I mean, all of that kind of stuff is preserved on the records. So I have one of these, a pre-publication test. Now, can I show it to you?
Yes, please do.
The cover, front and back covers are very similar to the original One Fine Morning album, but of course they've been graphically enhanced and done everything like that. And it's called an anniversary edition. The inside of the jacket has, I'm sure it's not, you can't tell. You see these little colorful things? These are posters and stuff for Lighthouse concerts of the day. And included in those are some that everybody goes nuts about. One of which is Lighthouse headlining a show at the Philadelphia. I can't remember the name of the club. Anyway, our headlining act was Elton John.
Oh.
So when we started, we were always the opening act for, a headliner of the time. But then there's a lot of people who became huge stars who, when they first started out, needed to open for somebody else. And we have a bunch of posters that show that. So that was that's sort of interesting, and the Isle of Wight. And,
yes.
So there's a lot of that. There's a letter that we found from the manager of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, which was the first orchestra Lighthouse ever did a concert of a rock band and an orchestra. And I never knew that he wrote it, but he wrote a letter to all the other orchestra managers in North America, saying how happy they were with the way Lighthouse and as an organization comported ourselves, and it was a great thing, and they made a lot of money on it, and suggesting that other orchestras do concerts with us and stuff. A lot of historically interesting stuff and lyrics. And then the second album has these extra 10 songs. And I'll show you what they look like.
Sure.
Now, I'm going to give you, first, I'll give you the spoiler. The
Okay.
spoiler is, in addition to this edition, which is a regular edition, sorry, this is a special limited edition that is also available, that sounds exactly like the other one, that looks exactly like the other one, except for those aficionados who want to have something that's really exclusive. The record company found a technology where they could press on translucent vinyl so that you can see through the vinyl. And then they stopped the press just before they put the little blob of translucent vinyl. And then they take the same colors that are in the front cover art, which look like little dots of acrylic, and they just throw them randomly and press the record. So every record is different.
Right.
This is what a special edition
will look like. It comes out like, wow, look at that. Look at
Isn't that fantastic?
It is.
And they're only gonna, I don't know if they're gonna change their mind, because I think there's gonna be an incredible demand at any price.
Oh, I would think so. Look at
What?
that. Look at that. Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. I would think there'd be a lot.
Anyway, so that's it. So that, and everyone that's pressed is a different,
Yeah.
is a unique.
They look different. Each one of them is different. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
unique. Yeah, I think there's going to be a high demand for those. I think so. I think so. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for thank you for showing those, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for showing those. I think there will be definitely a demand and something to look forward to for all fans of Lighthouse.
I have to end up with a commercial, because otherwise my wife, who manages the
Yeah.
me over the head, say, you didn't mention what we have a few websites, but the if you look up Lighthouse or Lighthouse Rock Band or Lighthouse Rocks On, you'll find some of the Lighthouse websites where, if you're wondering where you can buy some of this product, that's one of many places where you can get it. But it'll be actually, I don't know, Anthem Records. Anthem. It's the official release date is November 10th.
Oh, okay. Well, that's coming. That's right around the corner. Yeah, that's coming. Right around.
So it's coming out. I just gave you a quick.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Well, you know, all this talk about biscuits has got me hungry. So so I haven't eaten lunch yet. So yeah, the biscuit talk has got my stomach started talking to me. So all right, well, it's been very enjoyable, Paul. I want to thank you again for sharing.
And if you send me the URL, I'll put it on my Facebook or some of the other.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you can put that on there, and also I will send you a copy of this interview. I'll send you.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So I'll send you the actual interview, and then it will be on my channel as well. So we'll have it on two different places. You can post it on the website or wherever you'd like to, and then it'll be on my channel. So, you know, the more places it goes, the more traffic, hopefully, and the more viewership we can get. So that'll probably be in probably next week. I'll do that, send that to you. And thanks again. I really want to say I appreciate it, sharing your journey, as it were, as it is. And there'll be a lot of people will be checking this out, I'm sure. And you'll get some comments, and hopefully on my channel as well.
So I go, it's Blooms, like I'm trying to remember the name.
Oh, Pale Blooms and Beyond.
Pale Blooms and Beyond.
Yes. So I will send you that. Well, Take
Keep
care.
the flame burning. Keep the flames burning.
Yes, that's what we got to do. You're very, very
Yeah.
right about that. All right, Paul. Bye bye for now. Okay. All the best to you. All right.
Yeah, you too.